This type of home is an absolute deal breaker, and you should never buy this kind of home. Here's why. When you buy a home, the closing costs are different for each home. Closing costs include things like the services of the lender and the closing attorney, and the buyer almost always pays for these things. But every home has a unique closing cost that the buyer pays for that changes with each home. Things like property taxes or HOA fees, interest, but there's one thing that some sellers might expect for you, the buyer, to pay for that you absolutely need to stay away from. When you're buying a home, the closing costs and the down payment for the home will be due on the closing date. So for a $400,000 home, a 3% down payment would be $12,000. A 20% down payment would be $80,000. The lender part of the closing costs would be $1,000 to $3,000. The closing attorney would be $1,000 to $2,000. So already we're at about $2,000 to $5,000 in closing costs in addition to the down payment. So that's a lot of things that the buyer is already paying for. Some sellers will want to add an additional closing cost, and that's for you to pay for your own real estate agent. And this is an absolute deal breaker and something that you should never agree to. In the beginning of 2024, there was a lawsuit among a bunch of sellers who sued the National Association of Realtors. And part of this lawsuit was that they argued that the sellers had to pay for all of the real estate commission, and they wanted the buyers to pay for some of this. And because they won, some sellers now will expect buyers to pay for their own real estate agent. But this is something that I do not agree with. In fact, if you think about it, the buyers are already paying for so much of the closing costs and the down payment. You know how much the sellers pay for the services of the lender and the closing attorney? Zero. They don't pay for any of those closing costs. So to expect the buyer to pay for the commission on top of already paying the closing costs and the down payment is, in my opinion, something that is an absolute deal breaker, something you should not do. So here's how you can avoid paying for the real estate commission if you're the buyer, and even get the seller to pay for it. Keep in mind that for decades, the sellers have paid for both the sellers and the buyer's real estate agent. So it would be very new to expect the buyer to pay for their own real estate agent. This has really rarely ever happened in the history of real estate, but because of this lawsuit, some sellers are now expecting for the buyers to pay for that. So here's what you need to know. When someone lists their home with a listing real estate agent, they agree how much the buyer's real estate agent is going to get in commission. And this is listed in the MLS, but it's also listed in Zillow and Realtor.com at the time of filming this video. So if it's still beginning or middle of 2024, you'll still be able to see how much the buyer's real estate agent is going to get paid by the seller on Zillow. If it's past 2024, I'm also going to tell you how you can find out how much the buyer's agent is going to make. But so if you scroll down to the extra facts or the extra info in Zillow and you go all the way to the bottom of that section, you'll see how much the buyer's agent is going to make. This is where you can find out if you are going to be paying for the buyer's agent commission or if the seller is going to be paying for it. If we're past 2024 and you're watching this video, the best way to figure out how much you'll be paying for the buyer's agent commission or the seller is to have your real estate agent call the listing agent to ask them. The listing agent will happily tell you how much that they're going to pay for the buyer's agent. This way you can know, hey, is that the kind of house that I want to pursue where I don't have to pay for the agent commission? Or is that the kind of home that I want to stay away from because it means that I'll also have to pay for the agent commission? If we use our example of $400,000 home, the agent commission would be about $12,000 because that's 3% of the purchase price. So one way that you can get the seller to pay for the agent commission is to check to see how long the home has been on the market. If the home has been on the market for, more than 2 weeks or more than 30 days, it's very possible for you to pay extra on the list price of the home, but not have to pay the agent commission. So in this example, let's say the seller is already not paying for the buyer agent commission, and we're talking thousands of dollars, right? So if you agree to pay a couple $1,000s more on the list price, but you put in the extra stipulations that the seller will be paying for the buyer's agent commission, that's one way that you can get the seller to pay for it. Now, the reason you would pay a little bit extra on the purchase price or the list price is because you want to say, hey, we'll pay you a little bit more for the home, but we want you to pay for the agent commission. If you try to lowball the seller on the purchase price of the home, the chances of them paying for the agent commission is a lot less. They're not going to agree to that, obviously. But if the home has been having a hard time selling and you want to get them to pay for that commission, agree to pay maybe a little bit more on the purchase price, and that way you get an exchange, but you're coming out on top because you're paying less for the purchase price. Again, the practice for decades has been for sellers to pay for both agent commissions. So if the sellers are now not paying for the buyer's agent commission, one question that many people are going to have is, are the sellers also going to lower the purchase price? You know, if they're using that purchase price to kind of compensate for having to pay for all of the commission, then it makes sense for them to have to raise the purchase price of the home a little bit. So if a seller is expecting the buyer to pay for the commission, but they're not lowering the price of the home, it's really not in their best interest to do it because they're not going to come out on top. But if the seller is not lowering the purchase price of the home and they're expecting the buyer to pay for that commission, it's like they're double dipping. You know, they're really expecting both ends to be working for their favor, and it's not really fair in the entire transaction for the seller to get both of those things. So let's break down these closing costs a little bit more so we can explain where all this money is going. So with a $400,000 home, if you do a 3% down payment, you're looking at $12,000 for the down payment. If you do a 20% down payment, you're looking at $80,000. And then for closing costs, the costs of using the lender is going to be about $1,000 to $3,000, and the closing attorney is going to be about $1,000 to $2,000. So if you're using the 3% down payment and the closing costs for the lender and the closing attorney, you're looking at about a total of $16,000 for the down payment and the closing costs. Again, the seller doesn't pay for any of these typically, so to expect the buyer to pay the commission on top of this is really, in my opinion, not fair. It's not good for real estate. So this is why I think you should completely stay away from the homes where the seller is expecting the buyer to pay for that commission. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Victor. I put out videos every week about buying homes in Atlanta or any part of the country. If you have any questions about what it's like to buy a home, or you want some help purchasing a home here in Atlanta, feel free to call, text, or email me anytime. Thank you so much to everybody who has reached out. I'm always happy to help. And if you want more information about the best suburbs in all of Atlanta, check out this video. I'll see you there.